I think you've got your hello. Hello all, first and foremost. Nick, I think you're sharing the wrong screen. Uh, this your email's coming up. Awesome, thank you. Hello, welcome everyone. It's a very hot day here in London, so I have the blinds drawn slightly, so I'm a bit darker than normal. But welcome. Thanks for joining. This is a webinar brought to you by Net Zero Week and Climate Trunk. A little bit of background on Climate Trunk. So 9 years ago, I was reading a blog by a guy called Tim Urban, who wrote a blog called Wait But Why, and I read a line saying, "To grow a tree of knowledge about any issue, you need a strong trunk." And so, ever since that day, I thought to myself, it'd be great one day to actually try and explain climate change using the trunk as a metaphor. And I oscillated for years as to what the taxonomy should be, like what should the rings actually cover. And 9 years later, I found myself twiddling my thumbs. I was like, if I'm not going to do it now, I'm never going to do it. So in my day job, I work for the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit and founded something called the Net Zero Tracker. And Nick, who's on this call with me very kindly, who's going to drive the slides, works with me on that project. But from the 1st of August, I'm actually going one day a week on this new project, and I'm incredibly excited by it. I have two sponsors, and I am partnering with Oxford University, and it's being piloted in 28 schools. And yeah, very exciting. I'm also presenting it at the inaugural Visualizing Climate Conference in Bologna, Italy, in November. So all very exciting. I would love you to visit climatetrunk.com and subscribe or follow along on socials. That's probably the biggest thing you can do to support this project. But thank you. I did send when I sent the slides, Nick, I think it's changed the font. But that's absolutely fine. I'm sure it will work. No problem. So why climate trunk? Actually, just say on this slide, we'll skip the first slide because it's not as descriptive. So why climate trunk? So first and foremost, climate and energy are incredibly complex, and they're increasingly politicized. Most people don't lack information per se, they lack a coherent mental model. And that's not helped by misinformation and disinformation, which is rife on climate change. And we don't know yet how AI and all these chatbots are going to make it worse, or potentially there are some scholars out there who actually think it could make it better. But we're starting to see a bifurcation of even those chatbots into ideological corners. So misinformation and disinformation, and we'll get onto it. But deflection arguments is a big reason for why I am getting this project off the ground. I have ambitious aims. I'd like it to become the world's clearest visual guide to climate and energy. I'm releasing one infographic a week for probably the best part of 3 years, and I want to, and obviously the trunk will grow over time. So the order is science, impacts, economics, political economy, governance, solutions, energy, and life. Now, life was actually going to be you, but I was told in no uncertain terms just before I launched this that you can be triggering and guilt-inducing. So I actually changed it to us, so US, and then capitalized us, of course, looks like the US. So I gave up on that. And the night before I launched this, I called it life. And that's about your choices, your voices, and your spheres of influence. So I won't give a subtitle to all of these. A lot of them are pretty instructive. But that gives you a taster of what this project's all about. And the unique value proposition to this project is visuals, of course, memorable explanations. Visuals actually are much better at lodging into our long-term memory and kind of bypassing our short-term memory. It tends to just stay in our short-term memory, but visuals have the amazing ability to stick around and stay in that long-term memory. And the other two are really important. So coherence. So as this trunk grows, its visuals, I want the whole project to become more coherent. So I want someone who sees climate or energy as really foggy. They can't quite get to grips with it. There's information coming in from lots of different news sources and papers. I want them to have a safe space, come to the trunk, and be like, and have it as a calming, evidence-based explanation of the fundamental concepts of climate and energy. And the other UBP is that this will be updated continuously. So obviously the priority at the moment is to release the content once a week. But at about the year mark, I intend to either hire a data analyst or do the updates myself, and make sure that these actually have longevity and are durable, because that's so important. A lot of infographics out there on the net, they age quite badly, and so I would like this project to age gracefully. And who's it for? It's for everyone. It's for the public, of course, but it's also for professionals, for time poor professionals, for schools and teachers, for policymakers, and for journalists, especially non-climate journalists who want to understand these topics. There is going to be a strand running through today's infographics, and that is what I call whataboutism, or whataboutery, because yes, there's misinformation, but there's also many deflection arguments. I don't know how many people on this webinar have been at a dinner table. Probably every single one of you, and you've said something. You've dropped a fact about climate or energy, and then your cranky uncle or a friend or a family member has said, "Yeah, but hold on, what about China?" But we're only less than 1% of emissions. So I think that's something that most people can relate to. I certainly can. My stepfather and I have many robust discussions about climate change and energy. Cool. So the first slide, please. Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to start with just the fundamentals. As Katharine Hayhoe says, to try and explain climate change in 12 words, she says that climate change is real, it's us, it's bad, but it can be fixed. So we should start with it's real. Earth is warming at an extraordinary rate. It's warming at almost 0.3 degrees a decade, which is unbelievable, frankly, in the historical record. In 2024, it exceeded for the first time 1.5 degrees. That was temporary. It's come back down because of an El Nino, but another El Nino is about to hit the world's climate, and it's very, very likely that this year and next will actually breach 1.5. It doesn't mean the Paris Agreement goal is over. We can bring temperatures back down through removals, especially. We'll get onto that into the next slide. But I thought I'd just provide this context. It's real, and that's why we're here. We're here to try and obviously solve it. Next slide. So the last of Katharine Hayhoe's kind of famous thought is that it's fixable. And why is it fixable? Is because scientists have worked out that if we go to net zero CO2 emissions and then net zero greenhouse gas emissions, we can stabilize temperatures and stop the worst of climate change. Now, I summarized this graphic in three parts. So the tab up there on the left, the top left, we have to turn that as far down as we possibly can, as far down as humanly possible. So we're currently emitting about 42 billion tons into that bathtub, and we need to take that down to well under 10 billion tons as quickly as possible, preferably obviously around the middle of the century, but sooner is better. And now the bottom part is about dealing with what's left over. So it's highly likely that there will be some emissions that we just can't get rid of, and that are fiendishly difficult to eliminate completely. And we need to remove carbon to balance those emissions come the net zero date, and then maintain that over time. And those removals preferably need to be buried deep underground, and they need to stay there. So some people talk about durable net zero, but I just want to stress that emissions reductions should be about 95% of this task. And then the third part of its fixable net zero is that natural carbon cycle over there on the right. And that's all about nurturing and looking after those sinks that are already soaking up and mopping up a lot of our carbon. Guys, I have someone vacuuming behind me out of my room. Can anyone hear that? They can't. Okay, brilliant. Because I was going to go and ask them to stop vacuuming, but that's absolutely fine. So next slide, please. So what about it? Here we are. Okay, so this is something I'm particularly interested in because I see it every day. Those deflection arguments, and I'm going to start off with probably the most common one that we see at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit. But we're less than 1% of emissions. So this graphic is trying to do something very simple. It's trying to show that if you added up every nation with 1% or less of global CO2 emissions, they would actually be a bigger proportion than China, which is pretty staggering, to be honest. And this is looking at both fossil fuel and land use emissions. The picture changes a little bit if you take out land use change and just look at fossil fuel emissions. I think China jumps up a touch. But as you can see there, those nations that emit 1% or less are much, much bigger than even the US, India, and EU combined. So if you ever hear that argument, I think it's important to push back on that. I'm from New Zealand. You can probably hear my accent. We're only responsible for 0.17% of emissions, and this argument comes up a lot from politicians to journalists to media personalities. So it's important to state the case that if we don't do that, if we don't act, that's going to encourage others to drop the ball and not act either. A good analogy is tax. So imagine if you're a taxpayer, if you're a taxpayer and you're only contributing 0.001% of tax, that doesn't mean that you can stop paying tax. Because if everyone did that, of course, the government would have no money to pay for essential public services. So I actually quite like that tax analogy. That wasn't for me. That someone mentioned that in the comment section when I actually posted this for the first time. To put this in together, I often get, but hold on, okay, you're looking at territorial emissions, so emissions from the country specifically, but what about consumption emissions? So when I think I had 10 comments when I first introduced the infographic into the world, and it was all around, well, hold on, look at what about consumption-based emissions? So I did that. I had a look at that as well. I did a deep dive into consumption-based emissions, and yes, China jumped up above the coalition of the 1% or less, but not by much, and it was almost counterintuitive. A lot of people thought that China would drop because the West exporting their emissions to China and deindustrializing as China industrializes. But actually, China's just a massive, massive consumer market as well as a manufacturing exporter. So they actually went up rather than down, which I thought was fascinating. You can see the US and the EU dropped in comparison to India. India shot up a little bit, but the main point does not change. That again, if all nations that emit about 1% or less of global CO2 emissions were to give up on climate action, we would never ever reach net zero and never solve climate change. Next slide, please. So probably the second one on the hierarchy of whataboutery is, but what about China? So I was tempted to name this one, but what about China? But I thought one system, two stories actually summed it up a little better. So over there on the left, you can see that China is the biggest climate problem there is. They have almost 30% of CO2 emissions. Coal production is over 50% globally. Petrochemical production is through the roof. So is cement production. I think they poured more cement in 2 years than the US did in 100. There's a fact out there like that, and it just shows the scale of industrialization that's going on in China. But then, of course, on the right, China's actually the biggest solutionist for the transition of net zero. You can see clean energy investment, it's leading globally. Solar and battery manufacturing is over 80% in both of those categories, which is just mind-boggling. You can see some policymakers in Europe and the UK becoming quite worried about that and being like, well, we have to diversify our supply chains away from China because they are just such a hulk when it comes to manufacturing these clean energy products. And then you've also got the electric vehicle manufacturing. Again, that is raising worries and concerns in the likes of Europe and other nations. And down there, I think this is a fact that my former boss Richard Black filled me in on clean energy patents. I think this is incredibly damning or incredibly revealing as to what's actually going on and what the future is gonna hold. China has 75% clean energy patents, uh, so all the sunrise industries in the energy system, and so they and some people would argue that that means they are going to own the future when it comes to industrialization. So I think that's a fascinating one down there on the bottom right. So this actually belongs at the start with it's real, it's us, it's bad, we can fix it. But this is also relevant to the folks out there who say, but it's natural or it's the sun. So scientists know that climate change is anthropogenic or human caused because they see it everywhere. They call it the fingerprints of human induced emissions. I think I mentioned we produce about 42 billion tons of CO2 a year. You can throw another about 13 or 14 billion of CO2 equivalent if you add other greenhouse gases. But you can see there the warming, those warming bars, and that responsibility over there on the left. That's greenhouse gases. And then if you subtract that little blue part from the greenhouse gases, that little blue part is the air pollution that reflects sunlight back to space, uh, creating a net cooling effect. And so the next bar, the middle bar there, total human influence, actually the red bar drops quite substantially because of air pollution. Sometimes counterintuitively, I'm doing us all a service by reflecting sunlight back up to space so it can escape before it hits a dark surface and is absorbed and becomes infrared radiation. So, so you can see it's kind of telling two things. It's telling the story about air pollution, but it's also telling the story that greenhouse gas emissions from humans far exceed any of the radiation forcings from solar. You can see in the fourth bar, or from volcanoes. So over about a 50-year period, that's actually been at about zero, but I think I averaged this over 2021 to 2025. So it actually does show that there is a little forcing, a little positive forcing um, by volcanoes, I believe, but not solar radiation. If you want to know more about this, I highly recommend following Zeke Housefather. It was Zeke Housefather and Chris Smith that I spoke to before creating this infographic, and they're really across this data. And Zeke often likes to say that the sun has actually diminished slightly over the last 50 years. So it's certainly not the sun that's responsible for global heating. So this is a pretty common one as well. I haven't released this, so you've probably seen this. You're amongst the first people to see this in the world. So, but the climate has always changed. I always get this. I see it every single day. Um, in fact, Earth is heating at least 25 times faster than the average orbital driven warming that ended the last ice age. So the last ice age, it took a while to finish, but it was about 12,000 years ago, and the world warmed up between about 4 and 5 degrees over a period of a few thousand years, and then that obviously created the ground for civilization to develop and agriculture to develop in different parts of the world. But so that's what I'm comparing here. I'm comparing the warming as we came out of the last ice age to the rate of warming that is occurring right now. There is some talk in the science community that that rate is actually higher at about 0.35 degrees per decade, which is pretty scary. And we know that Europe is actually warming twice as quickly as the global average. It's warming at 0.54 degrees per decade. And the Arctic is heating, I should say, not warming, heating at an even quicker rate. So I think it's really important to remind folks that it's the rate of warming that is almost the most dangerous aspect to this, because it takes time for nature, for humans, for societies, for civilization to adapt, and this rate doesn't give us much time to adapt quickly and handle the worst impacts of climate change. So yeah, like I said, this has not been released, but I will be releasing it soon. Now, this is quite a complex one. So I'll just talk to it very quickly. Again, I haven't released this one, but this is looking at different past hot houses from antiquity. So the four that I bring out. So you'll see down the bottom right there is today's hot house. So that's caused by human emissions. But if we go right back up to the top left, that's the first one that I surface here, and that's called the early Eocene hot house. These names are pretty esoteric. Um, Now, CO2 levels were way higher than they are today, and sea level was way higher. It was about 11 degrees hotter than today. Scientists don't know exactly how hot it was, but they can look at pollen samples and other means to try and gauge actually how hot it was. So we know that it was hot back in the day. And then you have the mid-Miocene hot house and the mid-Pliocene hot house. And again, that shows those ones down the bottom there actually can show you analogs of what we're walking into. So the mid-Miocene was about 4 degrees hotter, and the mid-Pliocene was between 1 and 3 degrees hotter. So we basically become in a mid-Pliocene climate. Um, we're walking into that. There's no two ways. We can't reverse that. We are going to be walking into a mid-Pliocene hothouse. And scientists know that sea level rise, it took a while, but was about 20 meters higher than it is today. So that's indicative of the risks of sea level rise in today's current climate. The mid-Miocene, that was a bit hotter. CO2 levels were slightly higher, but we are advancing very, very quickly into a mid-Miocene type of climate. Um, the reason I'm showing this is that again I think it supports but the climate has always changed. The climate has always changed, but for very different reasons than today. Yeah, in most part, the climate has changed over millennia due to what's called Milankovitch cycles. So orbital driven changes. I have a graphic for that as well, but I won't bore you with that one. That's not released either. Uh, Next slide, please. So this is also quite a common one. Um, some people say that scientists how could they know? Well, it's like the science of climate change is recent and it's not settled, is often what I hear. But I'm invoking by Catherine Hayhoe. She always talks about, well, hold on, climate science is already 2 centuries old. The fundamentals. So this is just a quick tour, a quick fire tour of those characters, just Joseph Fourier, Eunice Foote, John Tyndall, Svante Arrhenius, Milutin Milankovitch, and Guy Callendar, and Charles Keeling, who showed us in no uncertain terms that climate change was real, and it was caused by greenhouse gases emitted by human beings. Milutin Milankovitch, I spoke about him on the last slide. He wasn't about anthropogenic human caused climate change. His work focused on orbital driven climate change over millennia. But yeah, if you ever want an interesting story about a chap's career, I recommend Wikipedian Milutin Milankovitch. Yeah, he's got an interesting story. And then I finish with the start of the IPCC reports that build on all of the work that came before them in terms of assessing the climate. Yeah, I often think about it through Isaac Newton's quote, "Standing on the shoulders of giants," and that's what the IPCC are doing. And the IPCC being the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But what if it's a big hoax? What if Trump's right? What if suppose climate change isn't as bad as we think? So there is a famous cartoon that I'm sure some of you will have seen. Um, it's about yeah, but hold on, yeah, I think it is. I think it actually says, but what if climate change is a hoax? And then it just lists off all the things saying, well, we made a better world for no reason. I think it's good because it brings a risk framing to climate change, which I think is really important. And so this is effectively a risk matrix, and it's inspired by a chap called Greg Craven. He was a school teacher. He is a school teacher, and he released a video, I think upwards of 10, 15 years ago now. But he basically just broke down. He was like, let's get through the noise of climate change, whether it's real or not. Let's just talk about it in risk terms. And these are the four these are the four categories uh, he created. And as you can see there, even if there are limited impacts and there's action, we actually get a lot of co-benefits. Um, so it's kind of a win-win situation. Like we need to be taking action on climate change, even if the very worst effects of it don't manifest. And I won't read out the bright red category in the bottom right there, but you can get the gist yourself. So so when people say, but it's a hoax, or but what if we get it wrong? I often bring that risk framing to the conversation. This is another one that we get quite often in New Zealand by a certain gentleman. He often writes in prominent newspapers in New Zealand saying, "Oh, hold on, we can't do anything." He kind of combines the "but we're less than 1% of emissions" with "oh, but we can just adapt." We can't actually adapt to a moving target, and so this is the brainchild of myself and my former boss, Richard Black. He said, "John, it would be great to have a graphic showing that if you don't stem mitigation, if you don't actually start reducing emissions, that has flow-on effects for more adaptation because the costs will increase. And then if we don't cut our emissions and we don't adapt to the new climate that we're facing, then that increases loss and damage." So this is what this graphic's trying to show. I haven't really tested it on the world, so I'd be interested in your guys' feedback. But I might finesse it a little bit more before I release it. But that's what it's trying to show. It's trying to show that we can't just adapt to this thing. We have to do both. It's an and, not an or. We have to mitigate. We have to slash emissions, and we have to adapt to the new conditions. And then if we do that, we minimize the loss and damage that will result. Now, this one doesn't really deserve to be here, but it's the World Cup, isn't it? So I thought I'd just shoehorn it in a league of their own. I have heard from Donald Trump that windmills, but windmills can't produce enough energy to power a society. So that's how I brought it into the slide deck. Uh, so this is very simply showing that the extraordinary size of windmills or wind turbines that exist now. This is looking at the size of an offshore wind turbine that was recently built in China. There are prototypes that are actually above 150 meters that have a blade longer than 150 meters. So they're in testing at the moment. And you can see there that a single giant offshore turbine can generate enough electricity to power more than 30,000 homes. Now that's looking at China. So if that same wind turbine was in the US, it wouldn't power 30,000 homes. It may power 15,000 because they're bigger consumers of electricity. But it gives you an idea of the scale of what one wind machine can do for a huge community. That's the size of 30,000 homes is bigger than my hometown in New Zealand, believe it or not. So there is a flip side to this. So yes, you've got lots of naysayers or people who don't really understand climate change. They think they know enough to express opinion, and they use these whataboutery arguments, these deflection arguments. But I also find a little bit of whataboutism within people who are alarmed, or who even who actually even work in this space, who care about climate change. And this is looking at the two questions that I'm also always asked, especially around the dinner table. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it. So the first question I often get asked is, but aren't we already screwed? Like it's too late. Like we're approaching the cliff face, the cliff edge. Uh, I would push back on that. So Kate Marvel, who's a brilliant scientist out of the US, she just wrote a book. Her name's Kate Marvel. She says that climate change isn't a cliff we fall off; it's a slope we slide down. So every tenth of a degree matters. Every ton of CO2 avoided reduces future damage. Um, but we never get to it. It's not a cliff face. We slide down, and that slope gets steeper. So I think it's quite an empowering. It's obviously negative, but it's also empowering in a way because it's saying that it's never too late to actually act on climate. Then some people will, of course, put their hand up and be like, "Well, hold on, what about tipping points?" Now, tipping points is there's a wide range of opinions from scientists, but tipping points are generally considered. This is my read of the situation as more regionally concerned. Now, that doesn't mean that that means that there could be huge impacts in a specific for a specific continent or for a specific country. Take the example of the AMOC, which some scientists think is slowing down in the North Atlantic, and that could have dire consequences for Europe and for the UK. Very counterintuitively, it could cool that continent down because of the way it changes the jet stream and the ocean currents. But again, that doesn't mean that the world falls off a cliff. It just means it becomes much harder for that region. So I think it's really important, and I often come back to this image if I'm getting a little bit catastrophic in my own thinking. Let's stop climate change as quickly as possible so that we can reduce the angle of that slope. And then the penultimate one is quite an empowering one, I think. So again, I haven't released this, so please don't take any screenshots. But yeah, so I will be releasing. It's basically showing that yes, it's important to consider your carbon footprint, but don't forget your climate shadow. You can grow it without guilt. And this relates to also a concept in corporate accountability called your sphere of influence. So if you're a company, yes, you should care about your value chain, your scope 1, your scope 2, your scope 3, but you should also care about how you're influencing beyond your own little bubble. And I often think about this at the individual level as well. So there are many ways to kind of cut this up. Some people talk about it through your climate superpowers. Catherine Hayhoe and others talk about it through your climate shadow. And you can kind of summarize it as your consumer, you as a consumer, you as in your career, and you as a citizen. And a few examples are, invest responsibly, get political if you can, join an organization, vote for evidence-based policymakers and politicians. And probably the most important one, or certainly the most important one, I think, is that one, talk about climate change. Catherine Hayhoe often talks about that being the most important thing that you could do every day is to advocate for climate action. So I thought I'd leave you with that one, and this answered the question. So the two questions I get are we screwed, and what can I do about it? So this obviously answers that second question. So whataboutism? Whataboutism? Oh, that's a hard one to say. Whataboutism next? So I would absolutely love folks to let me know, what I need to cover. What do you hear around the dinner table or next to the water cooler? What do I need to try and address to tackle these deflection arguments, this misinformation that's pretty. I know, and I'm going to leave before our Q&A session. I'll leave you with the last slide. Is there another slide there, Nat? I think there's one after this. Yeah, that's the one there. And we can go back to the one before it. Yeah, this is the one. Thank you. So true at the same time, I created off the back of a graphic from Our World in Data, which said the world is awful, the world is getting better, the world can get a lot better. And I thought it was quite a nice framing. It's from a guy called Max Rosa, who founded Our World in Data, a fantastic website. And I thought about that through the lens of climate. And yes, climate impacts are worsening, but the world has made real progress, and that's where the story is. Like that's the story seldom told. It's the story that we should all be telling when we're talking about climate change. We are making real progress. And that last bit there is that third one, clean energy's rise makes faster progress probable. I think that's really, really important as well. So how I often think about this is that blue circle is the one we need to be talking about as much as possible and contributing to. Because if we operate in this Venn diagram, if we operate in that blue circle, we will increase the size of that green circle over time because we'll make it much more likely that the rise of clean actually reduces emissions, not just makes them plateau as they are today. We are on the precipice of worse climate impacts, but also precipice of a clean energy transition away from fossil fuels. So yeah, then the message I would end with is don't let whataboutery distract us from talking about progress. And if you could jump back onto that other slide, that just to try and sorry, the one with those four questions of potential whatabouteries. Yeah, these one. Thank you. These are a few ideas that I'm throwing about in terms of what else I need to cover. But I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, and also if there are any other ones that I should be following. So yeah, I'd really appreciate that. If there are any questions, I'm obviously on the line for the next 15, 20 minutes to answer them. So I'd love some questions. But if folks need to jump off, I'd obviously love you to check out climatetrunk.com and follow this journey. Like I said, it's going to be a 3-year journey until the trunk is full. I have my hand trying to upgrade. Yeah. So any questions out there?
Thanks very much, John. That's fascinating. It was great to hear your explanation through each of those, actually. So really appreciate that. I mean, yeah, selfishly, one I'd love to hear about is that argument around the comparison of electric vehicle life cycle carbon assessment in comparison to internal combustion engine. That's another whataboutery that I'm constantly hearing.
That's a brilliant one. Yeah, that's a brilliant one. No, for sure. So that is actually on the list. It's on the list somewhere, but I will look at that. I think it's about I mean, obviously, it depends how long you drive your vehicle. Um, um, so it varies, but there is a range on that. But yeah, I'd love to tease that one out. I think it's about 2 years to like actually eliminate the embodied emissions from your EV compared to the fossil fuels that used in the car. If you're driving a fossil fuel or an internal combustion engine vehicle. So yeah, that's a really interesting one. So I'll note that one down. Thanks, Nat. Appreciate it. And on that note, I bought an EV a year ago, and it's the best thing I've ever done. Did the heat pump EV combo. So just solar to go now. Thanks, Nat.
Great. Thanks, John. And another great question here. Well, really good question from Disha Khandelwal. So there's increasing debate about how the use of AI-based innovative solutions can help to curb climate change risk to businesses. However, at the same time, the use of AI necessarily requires use of essential resources such as water. So can you give a deep dive into the two sides of that coin?
Yeah, so the good news is actually my second sponsor, I'm just going through the paperwork, but my second sponsor would love me to address these questions. So I've only done one currently on AI and climate. I do think it's a bit overblown, AI's benefits for the climate at this stage. I'm sure like they're going to be fantastic for demand response flexibility when it comes to managing electricity systems. But I haven't seen good evidence that the pros are going to outweigh the negatives. So I think the verdict's still out on that. There are advocates for both sides, but I do need to do a deeper dive into that. But please watch that space. I'll be doing at least 6 AI infographics before the end of the year, and I'll be obviously releasing them progressively. So yeah, please watch that space. I'm sorry if that was an unsatisfactory answer.
Thanks a lot, John. And there's 2 questions here related to, I guess, the sort of counterfactual between the fossil fuel electricity generation system in comparison to renewables when you're factoring in the build steel and concrete of wind turbines and whether that undoes the benefits.
Yeah, so that's a good one. So I mean, I'm hearing a chorus of comments asking me to look at embodied emissions. So I will put that at the top of the pipeline. I will look at embodied emissions. I think that argument is overblown intuitively. So that's my readers. You hear that, but windmills or wind turbines kill birds. I think we have to put this into. I think we have to put this into relative terms, and bring a comparator to the benefits that one wind turbine brings to society, and not just cherry picking those things. Now, some of those concerns, of course, are real. Um, I was speaking to someone the other day, and they moved because a bunch of wind turbines were going to be built near them. But they're huge clean energy advocates. But they were practicing NIMBYism. They didn't want that in their backyard. Um, Even though they knew that the societal benefit was important, they still moved. So, these are the trade-offs involved in climate and energy are real, and it's really tricky to actually manage them. I mean, the way I put, but what about all the mining? I think that's one that often crops up. And one of the infographics that I'd love to create is to show how much is actually extracted from the subterranean earth for clean energy, and then compare that to what's extracted from the subterranean earth constantly and on an ongoing basis to fuel our fossil fuel economy. I mean, that has been done before, but I'd also like to bring that to the climate trunk to try and show that one. Again, it's complicated because you have human rights issues, you have labor issues, for example, in the Congo with the mining of oil in particular. So it is complicated, and it often actually comes down to what you really value. Everyone is almost on a continuum in terms of how much they care about climate change, how much they care about human rights, how much they care about labor laws, and corporate accountability. So it's very, very difficult when you're juggling different values.
Thanks, John. Yeah, do think that really does talk to some of the pushback around net zero, doesn't it? The fact that although equity and just transition is firmly baked into the Paris Agreement, that side of the story has been sort of treated as an adjunct to the story rather than being really central to it. There's a really nice question, I guess, about the kind of raison d'etre or theory of change of the climate trunk from Rosalie Hunt. And Rosalie asks, how will you measure success and test how well these messages perform, particularly outside the climate bubble?
Oh, that is an amazing question, Rosalie. We need to talk. It's brilliant. So frankly, I've been concentrating on the content, and so I am going one day a week from the 1st of August, and I'm really excited by that because I'm still going to be creating this content and preparing it to go out on a Wednesday morning in the weekend, and in every possible opportunity in my day. But from the 1st of August, I'm going to start thinking about that. How do I land this outside the bubble? So I have partnered with the Legal Sustainability Alliance to get this out to lawyers, particularly time poor lawyers. But I have plans to test that also with accountants, with other time poor professionals, with corporates, with schools. I mentioned that this has been piloted in 28 schools. I would love to roll this out, not just in the UK, but also in New Zealand. And then I think that's at the point where I need to think really hard about how do I measure success, because I don't want to get caught in the vanity metric whirlpool where you just care about how many follow you on Instagram or LinkedIn, or how many likes you get. It's about that wider impact. And now it's really hard to quantify. Nick knows better than anyone. We're at the Net Zero Tracker together. It's really hard to quantify the impact that we're having. If a policymaker, Ed Miliband, for example, often quotes our stats from the Net Zero Tracker in Parliament. We don't know. We can't quantify that impact. We know there's an impact, but we don't know how big it is. I'd love you to reach out, Rosalie, and maybe we can have a chat. And if you've got any ideas about how I could measure success with this, that would be awesome. I mean, but at the moment, I just want to make sure that I can actually fund my time for one day a week. and actually deliver this over the first 3 years. But like the sky's the limit. I'm really excited, and the feedback that I've been getting of late has been really positive. So I'm super excited.
Thanks, John. There's a couple of really interesting questions, which I would kind of bucket in the terms of the response from the fossil fuel lobby. So looking at where the view or the messages that fossil fuel lobby are getting out there about how there is a contingency plan, no such thing as peak oil, where we won't run out of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And another one there also just around how planetary boundaries will be durable enough for this transition to take place at the timing of the fossil fuel sector. So
Yeah. No, no, yeah. So, no, I mean, a few things running through my head. So, it's the addition versus transition argument. Vaclav Smil and others argue that this is just an addition, because all we're doing is clean energy is not outpacing, what's starting to outpace demand now, and that means it's going to displace fossil fuels. So that's why it's so exciting. But we are getting both addition and transition at the moment. But obviously, we need to be doing just transition rather than addition. I don't know if Lee Bailey's still on the line. I'd like to answer his question. I saw Mike Joy pop out in that question. Hopefully you're still here, Lee. If you could just drop a yes in the Q&A, that would be great, and then I'll answer that. And the other thing I'm thinking here, just on that question, Nick, is we didn't leave. Oh, brilliant, thanks, Lee. Is we didn't leave the Stone Age for a lack of stone. So and transitions take time, and you don't know you're in a transition when you're in a transition. So Michael Liebreich, the veteran energy analyst, talks about peak horse and talks about peak landline. Like no one was talking about peak horse or peak landline, I should say, when it was actually peak. They could only determine that about 10 years after the height of that transition, away from horse travel, away from a landline phone. So we are, I think, very, very close. Most people think that we are approaching. I think we know that peak fossil fuels as a share of energy is behind us, but in absolute terms, we are not quite at either oil or gas. But the IEA has said in no uncertain terms that peak fossil fuels will be pre-2030. So we could well be at this point, and the Iran crisis could speed it up, that transition away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy. Okay, so I'd just like to answer Lee's question here. John, as a Kiwi, I'm sure you'll be aware of the work of Mike Joy and his views on planetary boundaries and the greenwashing of transitioning power generation without changing our behaviours. How do you see Climate Trunk working to address these concerns, or even being used to change these behaviours? It's a difficult one. Obviously, the IPCC in its latest report, they looked at behavioural change. Maybe I am an optimist, but I'm generally an optimist. But when it comes to individual behavioural change, over the short term, I am a pessimist. Over generationally, some people talk about one progress, one funeral at a time. Generationally, as we move through this century, I do see behaviours changing profoundly. There's a great quote out there that I think we underestimate the pace of change over the term, but underestimate it we overestimate. I'm going to get this around the wrong way. We overestimate change over the short term and underestimate it over the long term. I think that's the way I'd frame it with behavioural change. So we need to always raise these questions. You can already see the cultural pushback to EVs in a place like New Zealand, Lee. And we've got to overcome that slowly. We need leadership, we need musicians, we need sports people very publicly driving EVs. We need to change that culture. And I suppose the next question to that would be, well, hold on, well, EVs also emit greenhouse gases. What I'd say to that argument, that kind of Mike Joy argument, is and you will have heard this before, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the better. And I sincerely believe that. This can't be about the politics of sacrifice. This needs to be about the politics of substitution. That's the quote that I like to throw out. This needs to be about substitution, not sacrifice. Yes, we need incremental behavioral change, but if you take something like meat consumption is still going up 2% a year. We need alternative proteins to take pressure off our land, and animal husbandry, but um, that's going to take a long time. China, India to a lesser degree, increasing in one direction. The UK, for example, is decreasing when it comes to meat consumption. China will get there one day, but we have to create the substitutes. We have to create the alternatives that consumers will want. I just don't think we're going to solve this issue through a mass campaign in saying that sacrifice or behavioural change, a revolution of behavioural change is going to get us there. I think this is unfortunately going to be through incrementalism, and cultural change takes a long time. You're on mute. Sorry, Nick.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I really like this question here around from Wazam Khan. It would be useful to have something to showcase how climate change has affected people's everyday lives today, either indirectly or directly. When the long-term future effects of climate change are talked about, often it's seen as scaremongering. So to shine a light on the actual impacts here and now, would be fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the million-dollar question. How do we make it salient? How do we make climate change salient to our everyday lives when we've got a finite pool of worry? Like I don't have kids, but I know people with kids. This is just all too much. They're just trying to think. Getting dated. So it is really difficult. I mean, I'm obviously in London during a mild heat wave compared with 2 years ago. Compared with 2 weeks ago. But this is an opportunity. This is something that the impacts. We know that the heat is about 3 degrees warmer than it would have been without climate change. So we do need to make the most of that. Obviously, looking at the evidence, looking at the world weather attribution evidence, and using the opportunity to make that clear. But it is a hard one. Like it really is to make climate change salient. I think Daniel Kahneman, who was a Nobel Prize winner in economics, but he's actually a psychologist. He calls climate change the perfect problem because you couldn't design a problem with a worse fit for our underlying psychology. So, like it's the million-dollar question. How do we make it salient and relevant? It's really, really difficult, and that's why I do advocate for the politics of substitution, of talking about the story seldom told, of talking about all of the co-benefits, the energy security, the energy sovereignty, the decrease in bills in import bills from fossil fuel producers. So yeah, it's difficult. I'm sorry if that's an unsatisfactory answer as well, but we have to use all levers that we've got, and we have to make sure that anything that is salient, that is backed by evidence, that is climate change related, we need to be talking about it, and we need to hold those to account who aren't talking about it as well. I think that's really important. We do that in our day jobs at the Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit.
Thanks, John. A question here from Sam Ruddock, a bit more around the distribution, I think, of the climate trunk. So would you produce print stickers or your graphics? Would that be a way to start conversations?
Really cool. The first climate transition was actually hosted by Ashurst over London Climate Action Week, which was really exciting. I didn't do an in-person event, but plan to do that in a year's time. So print out the 52 infographics, 1 meter by 1 meter, and get people to come along. I think I think it is really good. It will be a really good conversation starter. But how do we get how do we get not the usual suspects in those exhibitions in the future, but the unusual suspects? How do we get it into Parliament? How do we get some Reform MPs, for example, to come and have a look? that's that would be the holy grail, I think, is to get this in front of parliamentarians that wouldn't necessarily engage with climate content online. I think that would be brilliant. I when I get a spare weekend, I'm going to create the ability for people to download posters, and that will be hopefully a small revenue stream to help sustain this project. So I just need some time basically to do that. I've found I'm going to use Shopify and Gelato. Gelato does printing locally, so if someone orders a print wherever in New Zealand, say, there's a local printer that will print that out. So I need to put that all in place. But yeah, really exciting. And I suppose I haven't made it. There hasn't been urgent for me because I think I need probably like 20 graphics out there in the first place before I provide the opportunity to order them as prints. But that is coming. Yeah, that's certainly in the pipeline. And yeah, if you reach out, maybe we could have a chat about that, and maybe you could test one of the prints out if you fancy one of them.
Fantastic. Thanks,
Uh,
John.
no worries. Chantal, I just spotted her or his question. Could those panels of infographics travel? Yes, yes, like the Earth photocompetence. Absolutely, they could. Yeah, no, absolutely. That would be the plan. I mean, it'd be eye-watering. I think the costs, but I think it'll be fine. Maybe I could get someone, an organization to print on each continent to print a series of the 50 best from the initial 100 to do that. Um, so yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. Guys, I think we're almost at time. Do you mind just going to the last slide, Nick? I think that's got the yeah, that's the one there. Yeah, so just to reiterate, if folks could land on climatetrunk.com and subscribe or follow this on socials, that would be immense. And if you've got Instagram, please follow it. I've been hovering around 85 followers on there for a while. So if I could pierce the 100 boundary, that would be incredible. But yeah, please do follow. And this is, like I said, this is only going to grow. This is only going to get bigger. And please put in your feedback and your requests for infographics. And those requests can be new or they can be upgrades of existing ones. So yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Nick, for helping steer the slides.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, John.